How's it going? All right, great. We already got a few people here. And I guess the first thing I wanted to mention is that I have hit 496 subscribers. I'm going to check it now to see what I'm at. So we're just about to hit the 500 mark. Now, I should say at the start of the year, I set one of my goals to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year. And it looks like I'm going to do that only about halfway into the year. So that's pretty awesome. It's going to happen. So we got to get that done. If you haven't subscribed, please do if you want. And yeah, okay. So welcome back. I do these live streams every week. I've been doing these since somewhere around the beginning of the year. So we're going on 6 months now. I still feel like I don't really know what I'm doing. Yeah. So this whole channel, Lance Independent, it's a play on words for stance independent. So I talk about moral realism and meta ethics, which is this abstract questions about the nature of morality, which is this branch of philosophy. My background is in psychology and philosophy. I do interdisciplinary work. So I talk about all that kinds of stuff. I also talk about metaphilosophy. So basically the nature of philosophy itself, what it is, how we should do it, what its methods are, what its status is, what its role is, how it's connected to the sciences and other fields of inquiry, those sorts of things. I also tend to take a pretty critical approach. So that's kind of my thing. Those of you who are here probably already know all this stuff. I don't want to be repeating this every week. So people are just going to have to get caught up, I guess. So this is the live stream. I am looking more to bring people onto the show. I've been on other live streams where, people pop in and out and you have conversations. And I really want to build that kind of community, especially because, I've been doing this for 6 months and I do it. Usually the plan is every 3 weeks. And then I take a week off, play an older video that like one of my guest appearances. So for about a year and a half to almost 2 years, I think, I was appearing on other people's channels. And then I finally started my own channel. I was waiting until I had everything cleared out of the way with finishing my dissertation, getting my degree and all that stuff. So again, if you don't already know that, I just finished a PhD in psychology. My area is social psychology. So I finished that up at Cornell. I actually finished quite a while ago. So I did my defense back in August of last year. Then I had to make some changes. Then I got those all done. And then I submitted those. Then there was like final revision. So it's a long process. It's a very long process, but that's all behind me. I also, I officially got my diploma, which also took a while. So now I have the diploma, which is really cool. So that's all done. So now I wanted to wait until most of that was cleared out of the way to start this channel. And I did. And I think it's been going well. I've mostly been doing live streams. But the other thing is, and I think this is what started bumping me up because I was a little under 450 subscribers a few days ago. I appeared on Kane B's channel, or Kane Baker. If you don't know who Kane B is, Kane B has been making videos, I think it's something like 10 years now on YouTube. And they're not live streams. They're typically prepared in advance and then they cover a particular topic. So that's how those are. So I should say, so I lose track of my thoughts a lot. So that's another thing that makes live streams like the worst possible choice for me, which is that I'm very scatterbrained and I lose track of what I'm doing and I go on digressions. And so the best thing for me would probably be to do prepared material because I do fine with that. It's not like I don't give talks and stuff and the talks are cogent. I don't start, belting out poems and stuff in the middle of them and lose track of what I'm doing or wander off. Someone has to go find me. But I tend to do that here. So often my streams will go like 2 or 3 hours. I'm like here to talk about one point and like some blog post, even though sometimes the blog posts are really long, sometimes they're pretty short. Oh, right. The other thing I should say, I also started this as a blog back in August. So the blog is also called Lance Independent. And for those that, I don't know if you've seen me the past couple of weeks, maybe took a summer vacation or something. I also recently moved the blog over to Substack, mostly hoping I would drive up traffic. It was originally on Wix. And that's where I had it. And that had more customization. And I was really happy with the look, but it's just Substack is where all the action seems to be at these days. So I'm over on Substack. There are links in the description for this video. I put them in every video. If you want to go check out the Substack, you can check out the particular blog article that is accompanying the particular video. But in any case, that's part of what I had wanted to mention, why I want to start bringing more people on and start having conversations with people is that I don't want the content of the streams to get stagnant and just keep repeating the same things over and over. And I should say, it's not like I have these broad, expansive interests where I'm interested in everything in the world. I mean, I do have a lot of interests, but they're not the sorts of things where it'd be interesting to hear from me about them. So, I love astronomy. I don't know enough about astronomy to say anything interesting. What am I going to go, oh, I think that's Jupiter? Like, it's not interesting. You don't want to hear me talk about it. Go find some channel where someone knows what they're talking about. So, one thing that happens when you go through a whole doctoral program is you specialize. You learn that one thing and you learn it really well. And so I know like two things, like really well. And then I don't know a whole lot about anything else. And it makes it so the comparative, you feel like, if you switch gears from talking about one topic to another, I just don't feel comfortable pontificating for an hour or two or having a debate about something that I just don't know about. So I just talk in my little tiny area of psychology and metaethics. One thing I haven't done enough on this channel, because, I mentioned the degrees in psychology, is it's mostly been philosophy. So metaethics, metaphilosophy. And I have touched on the psychology, but, there's more to talk about. So one big event that happened this week, and you could check this out, is the blog Data Colada. I'll put that in the chat. Data Colada. So they've been reporting on an unfolding set of events within adjacent fields to my own, which is basically Dr. Gino's a professor at Harvard, I think Harvard Business School. There's now growing evidence of data fabrication in, I think, a number of studies. And that issue of data fabrication is one that is of interest to me because it has happened in my field and it does concern me. That this is one of these factors that has contributed to problems in psychological science and in other fields. I'm sure it applies to other fields. I don't know as much. I don't watch the news on those. But within psychology, there have been a few high-profile cases of serious research misconduct, people fabricating data. Data Colada monitors that and some other stuff. And that stuff is really interesting. I'm interested in basically everything going on in philosophy and psychology that I think is relevant to improving the fields and making them function better. So I'm interested in methodology, and fabrication is one of the factors that falls out of what I take to be rather significant methodological problems in psychology. So that's a topic I haven't talked much about. Some of the stuff I'd love to talk about would be the peer review process, journals, like journal publication, how that whole thing works and what my concerns with that are. And you could call that broadly like meta science. So I'm interested in basically all the meta stuff, metaphilosophy, metapsychology. No one's ever called it metapsychology. I was just saying meta science because that's the typical term. But yeah, metapsychology. How do we go about thinking about and doing psychology as a field? So there, I've never used that term before. It spontaneously came out of me. So yeah, I'm interested in all the meta stuff. But, a lot of these were based on a lot of the live streams. They were thematically centered around blog posts. And, not all the blog posts I think are optimal for making a whole live stream based on that blog post. And I'm running out of those. So the blog is really busy right now. I wrote a bunch of articles because of, it's complicated, but I had a huge backlog of stuff and it's all coming out now. So I've started some new things on the blog that you might want to check out. So the main thing I started on the blog is Twitter Tuesdays. So what I'm doing on there is, there's a lot of commentary and discussion on metaethics on Twitter. I don't really want to be on Twitter. I don't like the platform, but there are people that sometimes even mention me and my work, and they'll even comment on me and my work. So including these videos. There's people that comment on that. And my way of engaging with that is to do these Twitter Tuesdays. So once a week, I have a blog article. It comes out, not surprisingly, on Tuesday. I went for the alliteration there, where I cover some comment. So far, there's been a sort of ongoing series where I had a whole lot to say about a particular, not just a tweet, but the responses to the tweet. And I sort of systematically evaluate and provide commentary on that whole discussion. So you can go check that out, just to give you a sense of what that was about. One particular person who also has a YouTube channel, Emerson Green, made a comment where they said that, there are sometimes they think of moral anti-realism is like a type of insanity. And so I comment on that, but I didn't have as much to say about that as some of the responses to that. And so one of them, for instance, is someone saying that, you can't really have a conversation with Lance, like that's me, and like they offered various reasons why, and then they commented on, because I endorse this view, the unintelligibility thesis, where I argue that certain terms and concepts employed in contemporary analytic metaethics are unintelligible. They're meaningless, and that has been met with some people are sympathetic to that, and they're like, yeah, I had that impression too, or I actually thought that all along. The interesting thing about this particular view is that, to my knowledge, I haven't seen any published papers that really explicitly push this point. However, I have, in the past few months, been made aware of commentary from philosophers that seems to hint that they may have endorsed similar views. It's not to say they endorsed exactly the same thing I'm saying, but part of the reason I don't want to go around saying I invented this, it's really lame when someone's like says that they came up with an idea and actually it's in a book that came out 30 years ago, or it's published in some paper somewhere. And I think there's a good chance people have published like a whole argument or whole paper outlining this. Maybe it's in some master's thesis or dissertation I just haven't run into, where people have argued, hey, I think some of the concepts more realists are using, especially non-naturalist realists, it might be nonsense, it might be meaningless. And so it's probably out there. I don't think I invented this type of argument. And in any case, it's so heavily inspired by people that have made similar arguments that I don't think it's something I really want to take credit for, so much as I want to say, hey, I think this is on the right track and I want to push this argument. In any case, you will find in a few prominent works, so one of them is J.L. Mackey's Ethics Inventing Right and Wrong. Mackey comments early on about the philosopher R.M. Hare, who's a prominent 20th century philosopher who is well known for a particular metaethical view. And Hare, basically Mackey says, Hare says that he doesn't know what people are talking about when they talk about things being like the objectivity of values. And furthermore, Hare says he doesn't know anybody else that knows what they're talking about. And it's worded something like that. That's a paraphrase, but I think it's objectivity of values as a specific wording. And I think it's that Hare says he doesn't know what people are talking about. I could look it up, but it's something like that. And that Hare doesn't know anybody else that does. So that hints at the possibility that a rather prominent figure has said similar things to me. And then there's a quote. I'm not going to pull it up now. Whenever I try to pull up quotes where I think I have a good quote list, and then I go search for it, I just can't seem to find it. So I'm not going to do that. But in On What Matters, Volume 2, Parfit talks about Williams. And Williams would say to Parfit, I think your concept of an external reason is unintelligible. And so Williams explicitly uses that language, explicitly in reference to precisely one of the key core concepts, this type of external reason that Parfit is talking about, that I think is unintelligible. So that, I think, is the clearest case. And again, this is not just like a well-known, but like famous within philosophy philosopher. So there are people who have articulated similar views, but notice how this is other people commenting on them, talking about it. I don't know if Williams has like a book called the Nonsense That Is Realism or something. You would think someone would tell me about it. If there was one, you think I would have run across it by now, but I haven't. So it looks like the interesting thing about that comment too is that Parfit also says, and then like other people seem to think the same thing. And so it looks like it's almost like there's this whole underground of people that suspect or like lean towards or endorse the unintelligibility thesis, but like, where are their papers? Where are their books? They're not there. And so there's something interesting going on there. Of course, realists might, flatter their positions by saying, it's not making it into print because the idea is so stupid, no one would publish it. So, that's one, maybe the idea is so dumb, you can't publish it. I don't think that's the case. So, I'm going to have to get a paper on this. Maybe someone will beat me to it. I don't know how upset I would be. I think a little bit, because I want to get the first paper on it because, hey, you want to be known for something, right? Even if I turn out to be wrong, and then you get these 8,612 citations, the most wrong article in metaethics ever. Hey, there's worse things you could publish. So, but if someone beats me to it, great. If they're out there, please get in touch. If you agree with me, we could write a paper together. So, the more people that endorse this view, the better. I think you'll eventually see it in the literature. And I think it'll be harder for a realist to ignore it at that point when it gets in there. Because if it starts appearing in like textbooks or the standard flow chart, there's these flow charts in metaethics where it's like, do you think moral claims can be true or false? Yes, you're in the cognitivist category. No, you're in the non-cognitivist category. And then the flow chart goes through and you answer a series of dichotomous yes/no questions. Sometimes it's three or more options, like multiple choice. And then that places you in the particular metaethical position that you're supposed to be in. Anyway, I already started talking about a bunch of random things. Let me pop up some people's remarks and say hi to people that are here. You probably were here 15 minutes ago, but let's do it anyway. I used to, and I say used to, but it's only been a few weeks. I would go on these, tirades where I talk for like an hour and then finally get to questions people asked an hour ago, and they probably already tuned out. So, all right, let's do it. All right. Okay, I got a hand wave. I got a good evening. Good evening to you as well. You're going to be disappointed. I don't have a lot to say about primitive concepts. So the particular blog post that this is associated with, which I might just read it. It's not as long as the last one. I know the last one was like 20 minutes of me reading. This one's like, I don't know, shorter than that. So what you will not get today, if that's what you're hoping for, is for me to offer some developed account of primitive concepts and why I think we don't have them. To really dig into that, it's going to require me to sort of divert quite a bit of my attention towards studying the literature on concepts and concept acquisition, digging a bit more into cognitive science to really get a better handle on where these sorts of appeals to primitive concepts stand in relation to contemporary research on human cognition and like concept acquisition and that sort of thing, in order to get a sense of like what to say about all this that's more developed than what I tend to say. So a lot of what I've tended to say right now is a lot more, if I'm being honest, is posturing, because I really haven't dug into the empirical literature enough to develop an empirically well-informed view. On the other hand, the people that are appealing to these concepts are rarely appealing to any, I mean, I say rarely, but I've never seen any. It's not like they're like, I'm appealing to this really sophisticated model of human cognition. A lot of it seems to be a lot more a prioristic, and it's not really based on or stemming from or defended by any substantive account of human cognition. So I think those theories are already sort of, flying by the seat of their pants, and it's unlikely I suspect it's unlikely they're going to be vindicated by the evidence that's available. But we'll see. I'll dig into that at some point. What I instead want to do is talk about more, I guess you could say, more the state of the dialectic. What I mean by that is the state of how discussions tend to go down and what some of my concerns with those discussions are. And maybe I could comment on how I think we could improve things. Because what I do want to say is, although I actually suspect that this idea of a primitive concept, at least the types of primitive concepts I've dealt with, where people are presenting them not as a concept that can't be decomposed into further concepts or something like that, but as an incommunicable concept, something that's you can have a concept, but it's not possible to articulate it in any substantive terms that someone that doesn't have the concept would readily grasp. I'm suspicious that there is anything actually like that. Now, just to head off concerns about what I mean by that, I absolutely 100% do not mean that a concept is only intelligible if everybody's capable of grasping the concept. That would be ridiculous. I do not think that if I or you or any particular subset of people don't understand something, and furthermore can't understand something, that therefore it's meaningless. I do not think because there's something to be meaningful, everyone has to be able to understand it. If you try to teach quantum physics to a baby, it's not going to work. It doesn't mean quantum physics is unintelligible because a baby is not able to understand it. And people often have various types of brain lesions and that sort of thing that might make them unable to process certain types of information. If a person has some type of agnosia or some other, something like that where they can't process facial expressions, does that mean emotional expression doesn't communicate anything and it's all nonsense and all the research on human expression is bogus? Of course not. It means that person isn't able to process facial expressions. Just the same, it's entirely possible if I don't get something that the problem is me. My concern with that type of appeal is that when I express my skepticism towards the meaningfulness of certain concepts in metaethics, I think what's not being appreciated is sometimes people just think, I'm new to the field. I showed up. I heard people talking about stuff. I go, I don't get it. I think it's nonsense. And that is not at all what has happened. What has happened is that I've studied it for a hell of a long time. I've studied it from the philosophical angle and from the psychological angle. And I gradually came to the conclusion, given repeated discussions, interactions, readings, understanding, to the best of my ability, the relevant types of psychological considerations here, maybe not understanding at a more foundational level aspects of concept acquisition. That's something I would like to understand more, but really looking at more surface level empirical research, which is my area of specialization, the psychology of metaethics. I became increasingly suspicious that there was something funky going on here. And that led me to suspecting that some of the concepts that philosophers were using weren't meaningful. But that is, as it stands, a type of hypothesis for which I don't even purport to have any sort of compelling arguments or evidence. I do think, on consideration of what's available currently, that is the kind of conclusion I think many people would come to, but I don't think it's an easy conclusion to come to, and I certainly don't expect people to. So this is the kind of case where I'm stepping out and saying, here's what I think is the case, and I'm pretty confident about it, but it's certainly the case that if I go and study some more things, that I'll find out what I'm wrong. I'll find out that I'm wrong. But what I don't expect is for someone to come along with a clear and lucid account of irreducible normativity or anything like that. I've looked at quite a few papers on this, and I'm not seeing it. So if it's there, if there's this, super lucid paper out there, why hasn't someone given to me? Again, not to say that one doesn't exist, but there's inductive inference isn't useless. So as time goes by and I continue to fail to have anyone provide a compelling account, and not even, it's not just that no one provides a compelling one. It's not like people provide one, I'm like, oh, that might work, and then I look into it and it doesn't. They don't even come close, like, ever. So it's a bit like if someone said Bigfoot lives in the woods over there, and you go, okay, well, do you have photos? And they show you like and it doesn't look like Bigfoot. You're like, it doesn't look like Bigfoot to me. And then you keep asking for evidence, and you don't get it. You don't get it. You don't get it. You go in the woods yourself. You go in and set up cameras. You do all that work. You still haven't seen Bigfoot. At what point are you going to go, yeah, I think maybe Bigfoot doesn't exist? That's the kind of situation I'm in. So I'm appealing largely to inductive and abductive inference. I'm not so much appealing to any sort of like deductive argument that certain terms and concepts moral realists are using aren't meaningful. Even that, notice how I'm phrasing it, certain terms and concepts. It's certain terms and certain concepts in certain contexts. I'm not saying whenever someone uses the word reason, it's meaningless. It's that I suspect the ways certain people use them in technical contexts aren't meaningful. Like specifically the way Parfit uses the term reason in like On What Matters. Okay. That was a long response to that, but hopefully that will, address some of the stuff relevant to the title of the video today. So we got another hi. So you've been a guest on here a few times, so welcome. The identities of celestial bodies. I'm assuming that's a joke, but I can, I guess. I don't know how interesting that would be. All right, so we get this comment. That happens in nutrition science too. Data fabrication or other problems? Because that was about 15 minutes ago. So I'm assuming you're talking about, and then you're mentioning epidemiology. So please clarify, and then I'll post that up here as well. So this is an awesome question, and this is the kind of question that I don't think I'm going to be able to give a good answer to. So while I'm raising a concern, I don't think I have the solutions yet. It might be years until I have the solutions, or maybe I'll just drop the idea and think that I'm wrong. For now, though, I think I'm probably right about this. Anyway, I haven't even said exactly what this is. So just very quickly, there are different types of moral realism. Roughly, there's non-naturalist realism and naturalist realism. Naturalist realist accounts attempt to, first of all, moral realism is the claim that there are objective moral facts or stance-independent moral facts. These are moral facts that are true, independent of the attitudes, values, goals, beliefs, or other mental states. The stances is my preferred term for this, which I think was proposed by Ruschafer-Landau. I'm not exactly sure who, but that seems to be what its source is. And I think stance-independent avoids some of the confusions that often accompany other terminology. It's not perfect, but it's the best I think we have for right now. Anyway, so moral realism is the view that there are stance-independent moral facts. So these are moral facts that are true independent of the goals or standards or values or attitudes of individuals or of groups. And so it typically rejects many forms of moral relativism or subjectivism that ground moral facts in people's stances. It's possible in principle to have a relativism that doesn't ground them in stances. We're not going to get into that. So Joyce has a good entry in the SEP, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, distinguishing what approximates stance dependence from relativism and arguing that technically they're distinct. Not going to get into that today. I have talked about it on the channel before. And if you're really curious about that distinction, leave a post in the, leave a comment, and then I'll respond and give you the reference for that. Because I really like that particular excerpt from the SEP, and I think it's worth repeating every time I get the chance. Anyway, so That's realism. And then you have this naturalist, non-naturalist divide. The naturalists want to give an account of the moral facts that is consistent with the natural sciences, where the moral facts, you could say, are a certain kind of natural fact. Now, what exactly does that mean? I'm not going to get into that. That would be like covering a whole bunch of, like, I'm not prepared when someone asks a quick question and then I'm giving a little background and context to give a whole account of what they mean by that. But they would be facts consistent with or that fall within the scope of the natural sciences. And often what this might look like is that moral facts, for instance, are facts about what's conducive to cooperation. Well, facts about what promotes cooperation, it's not some non-natural entity. It's not a mysterious type of fact. So it's the kind of fact you could go out and observe. Yeah, that action increases cooperation. That action decreases it. And so these are the kinds of facts that you could literally observe the facts that these natural moral facts supervene on. So you can see them; they're right there, or detect them in some empirically respectable way. Whereas non-naturalists don't think that you could do that. I'm not going to get too much into that, but the facts are not natural, whatever they happen to be. And so their metaphysical status is challenged to a greater extent by those that are more inclined towards naturalism. Now, I don't know if I would say I'm a naturalist or not, but I'm a lot more suspicious of when you get weird metaphysics. And I think this kind of metaphysical stuff is weird. A lot of those that endorse these views would either say, might be weird, but I still think it's true, or they might just say, it's not so weird. There's nothing strange about this. We're going to come down to having very different conceptions of what kinds of counts in metaphysics are going to be the more or less plausible ones on offer. In any case, so you have these two different types of positions. Now, I'm going to set aside the naturalist accounts because I don't have huge concerns about their intelligibility. If someone says moral facts are facts about what increases or decreases well-being, well, that's perfectly intelligible to me. I'm not going to say, what is well-being? And, people could raise questions about precisely what you mean by well-being or flourishing or that sort of thing. I do not think that if a concept is vague or difficult to define, that makes it meaningless. And so I've never thought those were good objections. So, people used to raise, I've always thought that people raise really bad objections to utilitarianism. Whatever you think, if there are good objections, I'm not getting into that, but there's a lot of bad ones. And one of the ones I think is a bad one is people saying, oh, well, there's no good definition of happiness, so you can't really promote something because we don't know what it is. These are the sorts of things where I don't think it's very plausible that, people will push at the boundaries of broad and complicated terms, find problems with them and go, aha, so the term is nonsense. And that's not compelling to me. So I don't think that the concepts that I'll get to that I think are meaningless because of those sorts of considerations. Those sorts of considerations just gesture towards the way a great deal of language and concepts work, which is that they don't have these sharp boundary conditions where we could say things with these characteristics fall within the scope of the concept and these things don't, and it's neat and it's clean. Concepts are messy. Language is messy. And something like happiness or flourishing, they could be messy, but still robust and substantive concepts. Anyway, so go over to your non-naturalists, and they will invoke a variety of terminology, categorical reasons, or, there are these categorical moral facts. So categoricity would be one characteristic that I'm highly suspicious of. Some of the ones I'm less suspicious of would be like universal or absolute. So absolute moral rules or exceptionalist morals makes perfect sense to me. I really, though, personally see that as more of a characteristic of normative moral facts. Although you could say it's a meta-normative characteristic of normative moral facts, whatever. It's not that important. I don't have a problem with the concept of a rule that doesn't have exceptions, like never steal. I don't endorse the view never steal under any circumstances. What I'm saying is it makes perfect sense to have a rule that has no exceptions. So absolutism, when it's used to refer to moral rules that have no exceptions, totally makes sense to me. Universalism, if that's understood to mean the rule applies to everybody in the same way. So nobody should steal. This applies to everybody. All people should X. Makes perfect sense to me. So a lot of the concepts within this discourse, I don't have issue with them. What I take issue with largely is the type of language that comes up when people start talking about irreducible normativity. And this comes up in a variety of ways. It often comes up when people talk about what you should and shouldn't do, what you ought and ought not do, and what's good and bad. If you really want to split hairs, you could call the last of those irreducible evaluativity, if you want. But this encompasses both of those, both the sort of shoulds and shouldn'ts and the goods and bads. And my concern with a lot of this language is that, oh, and also I think one of the biggest ones I've been focusing on a lot lately is when people talk about reasons. So you can have a reason to do something. That's probably the one I complain the most about. And in any case, so it's irreducible normativity and notion of these normative reasons, but it's specifically when these are invoked in ways where you purportedly can't discharge the normative elements of the terms. You can't sort of break them down into non-normative or descriptive components and understand them in those terms. It's when they are irreducibly normative. That's when I take issue, because I don't think that that's meaningful to talk about some irreducible normativity. I think it's just meaningless. I don't think there is any such thing. I don't even think it makes sense to talk about such a thing. And yet this seems to be a pretty common view among moral realists, and I guess you could say within contemporary analytic metaethics and philosophy more generally, to endorse the view that there are irreducibly normative facts. And this even bleeds outside of morality into epistemology and any sort of domain that's purportedly normative. You will find a contingent of people that think the norms are irreducibly normative. And that's what I take issue with. It's a bigger question as to why. And I want to get through some more comments here and then talk about the blog post, and then maybe I'll get into talking about that. I should say I'm only going to go for about another hour today. I don't want to spend a long time. Anyway, so to address this question, given a term, how do we tell whether it's meaningless? How do we differentiate meaningless terms from terms whose meaning we don't know? It's a very good question. The answer is, I don't know. So it's probably going to differ from term to term, concept to concept, how exactly we go about figuring out whether it's meaningless. What I suspect is that there will be no hard and fast rule. I don't know of any decisive test for telling whether something is meaningless. What I can say is that there's probably a few things you could say about when you should start to suspect whether a term is meaningful or not. For me, I have sympathies with pragmatism, and I am going to start to suspect that a term, or you could say the concept to which the term purportedly refers, isn't meaningful if it doesn't result in any sort of it has no practical significance, would be one way to put it, where you could ask the question like, well, if this thing was real, or if it wasn't real, what differences would we observe? Would it matter? What practical consequences would it have if this is true or not true? That sort of thing. Basically you could ask this question, well, if it were true, why would that matter? What would be the consequences of that? And if the answer is there would be no consequences, for me, that's going to lead me to start to suspect that it's not meaningful. There are no observable, detectable differences of any practical relevance. That is probably not a satisfactory standard for most people, because someone might say, look, something can be true or false, even if it doesn't have practical consequences. Now, I'm not even sure if I agree with that. But the more important point is just that I don't want to articulate a view that is only true if you're committed to a particular type of pragmatism. I suspect that the terms in question, if other people reflected on their function, use, and meaning, they wouldn't be able to come up with a satisfactory account of their meaning or of the role that they play in deliberation or decision-making or choice or evaluation. Of course, they're going to disagree with that. But the problem is that if you wanted to show that a particular concept isn't meaningful, if that concept is embedded in a broader framework of views and beliefs and attitudes and values, in which it's enmeshed in such a way that it seems like it's playing an important role, but there's a problem with that entire sort of web of beliefs, it's very hard to isolate that one problem and say, this is the problem, because it's going to be buffered against your objections to that particular concept by the illusion of substance and meaningfulness that is created by its embeddedness in the broader web. I do have a blog post where I talk about this sort of thing more, what I call a Toland's web. And that's probably also a bit too much for addressing this question in any preliminary respect. So I would say one thing, terms and concepts, you might start to suspect that they're not meaningful when distinctions between whether the thing the concept is referring to are true or not. If it has no practical consequences, that's one factor. Whether it explains anything, whether it's relevant to deliberation, whether it's relevant to our observations, whether it's useful in making predictions, whether it's useful in achieving one's goals. Basically, it's use. is going to be the biggest factor for me. Aside from that, there are a few things that I think should be regarded as red flags or hints that the concepts in question aren't meaningful. One of them is that the proponents of the concepts are not able to explain what the concepts mean. I do not think if a person can't explain what a concept means, that decisively indicates that it's not meaningful. But in the case of the kinds of concepts that I reject, their proponents, I think, can't really explain what they mean. So if you ask someone what they mean by these sorts of concepts, in fact, maybe I should pull up the Parfit quote, just because I think that would help illustrate what I'm talking about. Let me find it. While I'm doing that, I'll see if I'll come back to this question and then, see if I've got some quicker things to answer. Oh, no, I have it. So I opened up the PDF and it went right to the page that I wanted. Probably it just saves your previous location. So actually, since I have it open, I'm going to have a look at some other questions so we don't get too far behind, and then I'll come back to this. So give me one moment. Haven't people been writing about the meaningless of terms since the 1600s? Maybe they have. Unfortunately, I don't really have as much. I had a very basic exposure to history philosophy. And if people were saying stuff like this, I haven't seen it. Most of the stuff that I've seen about meaninglessness comes from logical positivists. And it's the sort of thing you would see in like A.J. Ayer's work. So, it would be only stuff that's about 100 years old. Logical positivism fell out of favor many decades ago. It's not popular anymore. There's a couple people that are positivists that are still around, but it's not like this big thriving point of view, but there are attempts to revive it. All right. All right, you think we don't have primitive concepts? Surely that's false. We at least have primitive concepts. So it depends exactly what you mean by a primitive concept. I have had exchange. Well, the blog post will get into this, but whatever. I'll cover it briefly now too. If by primitive concept, someone just means primitive concept in the way that it's typically used, like if you look up a description of what a primitive concept is, what you'll see is roughly something like a concept that isn't composed of two or more like sub-concepts. You could call it an atomic concept. It can't be decomposed into two or more additional concepts. So, maybe an example of this would be like red or redness or something like that. You're not going to be able, certain sorts of qualitative terminology, it might not be able to get broken down into something else. You could say it's sui generis. It's not the sort of thing where you could break it down into two different things. So something like a green chair, you could clearly break apart the concepts green and chair. So there's certain sorts of compound concepts that are going to be composed. You could decompose them and say, well, it's a thing like this. Yeah. So like a polar bear, it's a bear, and then it has these other sorts of characteristics. So you could break down the concept into more fundamental concepts. And then there might be these fundamental concepts that can't get broken down further. But when I'm asking someone, what do you mean by an external reason? What does this mean? What are you trying to say here? I'm not asking them, hey, what concepts is your concept composed of? Decompose your concept for me. That's not the question I'm asking. What I'm expressing is, it looks to me like you're using a word in a way that I can't make sense of, and that strikes me as superfluous. It doesn't do work. It doesn't get anything done. It doesn't explain anything. I don't need the concept. In other words, one way to put this, and this is another way of framing a possible test for whether, at least on my view, whether something could be meaningful, is if I get rid of the concept, are there any cost to me? Does it matter? I guess I'm really saying the same thing. But it's a question of whether the concept in question is superfluous. Does it do anything or not? And in these cases, when I've asked what these concepts do, I will get answers where, they do quite a bit. They tell you what you should do. But this quickly gets me into a case where, okay, well, their conception of what I should do seems to me to be some kind of non-human account that I don't endorse. And so they're appealing to yet another philosophical position I don't endorse. And very quickly, I'm treated to this whole web of other views, all of which collectively I reject. Each individually I reject. And so I'm just given this account that puts me in this loop of other sorts of things I'm also inclined to reject. Of course, it could be that I'm on the outside of that loop and that from the inside, it all makes sense and it works perfectly well. But if it's doing it, I haven't been convinced that anything within that loop is really necessary to get anything done. So for instance, I think, as an epistemic anti-realist, I could go about reasoning forming true beliefs, achieving my goals, making reasonable inferences, making accurate predictions. I could do all the things that I think I would need to get out of a useful epistemology, out of an epistemology worth employing, without having to endorse or presuppose or imagine that there are any stance-independent epistemic facts. I could just think, okay, well, these epistemic standards, if I employ them, I'll get true beliefs or I'll get useful beliefs. And these other ones, I wouldn't. So I'm going to employ those because that's my goal and I want to achieve my goals. And so it's not the case that these more truth-conducive epistemic standards, that I ought to use them even if I didn't want to. I use them because I want to, and then I get the job done. At what point does it need to be true that I ought to use them even if I didn't want to? What is that accomplishing? What's that doing for me? I think it's not doing anything. I think it's a useless notion. So, if someone look, at worst, if someone wants to say, okay, well, just because it's useless doesn't mean it's not true. Let's say I granted that for the sake of argument. Oh, okay, so you have a theory that's true, but it's useless. Good job. So your job is to figure out true and useless things. Yeah, I'm more concerned about things being useful than true. And I don't know why philosophers would be interested in anything other than that. So I find the lack of pragmatism within philosophy weird and pretty disappointing. In any case, regarding primitive concepts. So if people just mean like an atomic concept, I am not objecting to whether there are such things. I don't know if there are. It seems plausible that there could be, but I'm not rejecting that. What I'm rejecting is, and this is how the discussion might go, is, hey, what do you mean by that term? What do you mean by the term reason? You're using this Parfit's conception of reason. What do you mean by that? Oh, well, I can't tell you because it's a primitive concept. Or, well, it's a primitive concept. They might not even say I can't tell you. In that case, I didn't ask for a decomposition. And so to respond with I can't tell you, or I can't tell you because it's a primitive concept, is a little weird, because I didn't ask for a decomposition. So if I said, hey, can you decompose the concept into its more fundamental components? And they said, I can't do that because it's a primitive concept. Okay, so they're using primitive concept in the way that I was already familiar with. But that's not what I'm asking for. And so it could be that people are not understanding what I'm asking, or it could be that they're using the term primitive concept to mean something in addition to or instead of this use of a non-decomposable or atomic concept. And in that case, it looks like they're saying that the concept can't be communicated. And so typically what people espousing these sorts of views will say is you might be able to get someone to acquire the concept, but you can't do it by explaining it in terms that don't circularly refer to the concept. And so what you end up with is you got a couple options. You have ostension and synonymy. So someone could give you other terms. So, if someone comes along and they say, there's a schlub over there, there's a schlorb, some weird word, and I don't know what they mean. And then they say, oh, like a bear. I just use that word to refer to bears. Then I go, oh, okay, because I know what a bear is. So now I know what their term meant. They were just using a term to refer to a bear. No problem. Synonymy got the point across. I already had the concept of a bear. They were just using a different word to refer to it. So that is one way they could convey it. And then another way is to point at it. You see that thing right there, that big furry creature that's fishing for salmon in the river? That is a bear, or that's a whatever word they use. And so that could get the point across. So in both of those cases, you might be able to convey the concept with synonymy or ostension. And people have tried this with me with this concept of reason. So they might point to, well, a person decides to punch another person just for fun. You could see when you observe situations like that they have a reason not to do that. And then, if I ask, well, what is the reason? Well, that it's morally wrong. I'm not acquiring the concept of reason in that context. There's a lot of things I could say about this scenario. I could say, I don't want them to punch people just for fun. I would try to stop them if I could. And there was an appropriate context. If they were like, if you prevent me from punching this person, I'm going to punch 1 million people, and I can, and I have superpowers. Then I don't know what I would do. But all else being equal, I would prefer that they not punch people for fun. I try to stop them if I could. I disapprove of the action. I think it's mean. I think the person that does it is a jerk and they're violent, and I don't want them around. I think there should be laws against it. There's a whole bunch of stuff I could say about the action. I don't know what it would mean to say that they have a reason not to punch the person, and that reason is that it is wrong to do so. What's the reason is that it is wrong? Or someone might say, well, because they have a duty not to, or because it would hurt the person. So the fact that it would hurt the person gives them a reason not to punch the person. What the hell does that mean? It gives them a reason. So that's metaphorical language. Like if I gave you $1, that's an act of giving. That's literal giving. There was a thing I had. I performed an action. Now you have the thing because I performed the action. I caused my possessions to become your possessions. That is literal giving. A fact, what is it? How does it give a reason? What does that mean? Does it causes the reason? It generates the reason? Is it it's not spatially located? Like, what the heck is the relation that's supposedly going on here? So facts apparently give reasons. I don't know what that means. And then the reasons count in favor of you performing the action. I don't know what that means. And the thing is, and it's really important to stress here, is that all of this language just looks obscure. I don't think it's a feature of ordinary language. This is some sort of technical language that philosophers are using. If you're speaking in technical terms, you get to come up with whatever words you want for what you're talking about, right? So it would be really misleading if I started using everyday language like, I don't know, sandwich, and then I started using that in some technical context in a way that was really confusing to people. But if you're a scientist and you identify a new particle, you can name the particle. It's not like people go, what's a Higgs boson? And someone goes, we don't know. We can't explain. It's a primitive concept. No, you came up with the term, and you came up with the term in order to describe something that figures into your model. So you can definitely give a description of it. And so philosophers are coming up with this proprietary language that they invented. What's weird about it is that they don't come up with new terms. So instead of coming up with a new term for reason, they actually just use a term that's already part of everyday language, but they're using it in this technical context. There's some type of mysterious reason, and then they still can't tell you what it means. And that's just weird. Now, if they're saying it's part of ordinary language, that's an empirical claim. Prove it. And they haven't. There has not been empirical research demonstrating that ordinary people use reason in the way that Parfit does. There isn't research showing that, or at least not good research. And if there is, I'm not aware of it. But again, I study the psychology of metaethics. I could tell you all about studies in this: Goodwin and Darley, Polzer and Wright, Grangian and McWhite. So I could tell you all about the studies on the psychology of metaethics. And there's no literature or robust studies demonstrating that non-philosophers have a concept of external reasons, and that is the concept that's regularly employed in everyday contexts. There hasn't been robust research showing that there are cognate terms for the term reason that exist in all or most languages around the world, and that lexicalization manifests in a way consistent with its usage in English. You do not have research. That doesn't exist. There's no research like that. And so we don't have any, and it's not even that we don't have good empirical evidence. In that case, we have no empirical evidence, or at least no direct empirical evidence that this is the way that ordinary people speak or think. We just don't have that. So philosophers are welcome to say, no, I'm not using reasons in a technical context. I'm using it in the ordinary context. Okay, the onus is on them to demonstrate that that's actually the case. And until and unless they do, it looks to me like they are, at the very least, coming up with a hypothesis about ordinary concepts in ordinary language. That hypothesis itself consists of a sort of technical articulation of what they purport to be the content of ordinary thought and language. And then we can still ask them, okay, well, what does it mean? And they can't tell us. They can't communicate the concept. When they do try to communicate it, it's through weird thought experiments, pointing to a person punching a baby. That demonstrates the concept. How? How does it demonstrate don't you have the concept? No, I don't have the concept. Yeah, I'm against baby punching. It doesn't mean I have whatever weird concept you're talking about. I don't need weird concepts to be against baby punching. So I still don't know what they're talking about. So the issue here is not really so much primitivity, but incommunicability, is that they have concepts that they don't appear capable of explaining in any sensible sort of way. And does that mean the concepts are meaningless? No. Maybe some people have access to concepts and other people just don't. I already think that happens, so it could be going on here. But typically when that goes on, one would look, if it's going on at the frequency with which I suspect it's going on here, where it's not like a bunch of people that just haven't heard about these concepts don't have them. It's that I've been studying this for a while. I still don't have the concept. Again, you have these competing accounts. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but it's also possible maybe there's something wrong with these concepts. And one of the things that puzzles me is the kind of incuriosity that I've seen from some people about the fact that what I suspect is going to be a growing number of people explicitly saying, yeah, I don't know this concept either. And I don't know what you're talking about either. So Bernard Williams says this. Oh, I was going to talk about that quote. Okay, but there's still more comments. So let me get through those and then I'll get to the quote. Like and or not seem like great candidates to be proven of concepts that we have right. I don't think so. So I think these are all terms that someone could explain what they mean, and people do explain what they mean. So I think that when people are, say, learning English, someone has to explain what these words mean and how they work, and then people go, oh, okay. So I don't think so. If someone bridges Hume's is ought, what happens next? That's a mysterious question. I like the question, but I don't know what to do with it. I feel like really addressing Hume's is ought. One thing I'll just say briefly. I take a pretty, I don't know if you want to say, you could say reductive or deflationary view of the is ought problem, but I see it as just a straightforward matter of the structure of logic is that, the premise, you're not going to get something out of the conclusion that's not somewhere in the premises. And so you're just not going to be able to cross the is ought gap insofar as the terms are intended to refer to different terms and concepts. You're just not going to be able to move from premises to premises that lack an ought to a conclusion that has an ought in a way that's going to work. So I just take it to be a basic feature of logic. And you could even swap out is and ought for like something else, and you're going to get the same thing. So you're not going to be able to make a bunch of you're not going to have a bunch of premises about like potatoes that somehow get you to the conclusion that oranges exist. It's just not going to work. So I take it to be just a standard feature of logic, and that this is just one instantiation of something that is just a fundamental feature of the way that logic works. So I don't think there's much to it beyond that. All right. So I've studied for about as long as you have, and I understand the meaning of realist terms. So you might. My hypothesis is that people that believe that they understand the concepts don't actually understand the concepts. So it might be that you studied for as long, you acquired the concept, and for whatever reason I can't. The other possibility is that there is no intelligible concept, and that everybody that believes they have the concept is actually mistaken about that fact. That would have to be true if I'm right, because obviously if the concept isn't meaningful, no one could have the concept and it be meaningful, in their mind or from their first person point of view. So I'm committed to the view that nobody has the concept. So yeah, it's possible you have, but on my view, you wouldn't, and on your view, you do. That would be a matter to resolve. Are you setting the bar too high? You seem to be saying realist terms are meaningless unless a loose and compelling account can be given. Is that what you're saying? Surely that's not right. I don't know. I mean, is the bar too high? I don't know. I mean, compared to what? I guess I would need to hash out what we're supposed to be comparing this to. But I don't think the bar is too high. Does it, your version of it, not presuppose something that makes S true? Maybe I missed something there. Or false, aka some fundamental structure of reality which has a specific shape. What does it look like? I'm not sure I quite understand the question, so you might need to rephrase or add a bit more. And you could post a whole long thing if it takes more to develop, but I don't know how to address the question adequately as it is. So there's a minor variation here. So welcome back, Joe. I hope you're recovering well. So this is Majesty of Reason, Joe Schmid, who has a great channel, and you should go check that out. Hopefully I'll be on there. I got to get on there so we could talk about the dissertation stuff. So I could actually finally talk more about my empirical work. Okay, the truth suppression levels are over 9,000. So yeah, every time I do a stream, Joe pops up and says that I'm suppressing the truth. Usually something about righteousness is mentioned. All right. Thanks so much for all these questions. This is cool. It gives me something to talk about. Do you think intelligibility is independent of human mental states? Oof, that's a good question. I think, for example, the perfect use of reason. I have to puzzle this one out. Do you think intelligibility is independent of human mental states? I think probably, yeah. What I might have to do is draw a distinction between a certain type of, I would say yes. And so you could draw a distinction here between two different sorts of situations. One situation would be that a concept has content. You could say that it's meaningful in a certain sense, but that for whatever reason, human psychology, it could be a feature of all human psychology, it's beyond the grasp of human beings. So this is similar to some views that have been proposed about the nature of consciousness, Mysterianism, which is that consciousness is just beyond human comprehension. And so you could think that there are certain concepts that if you had godlike powers or you were a Laplacian demon or something like that, you could understand the concept, but humans just don't have the conceptual, they don't have the cognitive architecture to get the job done to grasp the concept. So maybe there's like a certain super weird, sophisticated geometric figure that has like trillions and trillions of sides. And like a human could never grok it or understand it, but a being with like a cosmic entity with a supercomputer brain could get it. And so in that case, the concept's intelligible, but no human would ever be able to get it. They wouldn't even be able to come close. And the cognitive resources they would need to understand the concept, if they had them, it's questionable whether they would be in any meaningful sense a human anymore. So we could talk about concepts that are, you could say, ungraspable or ungrokkable from a certain point of view. And that would not be independent of human mental states, or more generally, I would say that it wouldn't be dependent. It wouldn't be independent of the mental states of any given agent. You could say that those concepts would be accessible or inaccessible relative to the epistemic capacities or the conceptual capacities. Conceptual is like broad enough to include epistemic considerations and other sorts of things. So you could say concepts can be more or less conceptually accessible to particular agents given the characteristics those agents have. And so there could be, and it doesn't have to be this sort of linear thing where there's a concept that only godlike beings could grasp, but no humans could grasp. It could also be that there are concepts that for whatever reason I could grasp, but someone else couldn't. And then there could be concepts they can grasp that I couldn't grasp. And that wouldn't make the concepts unintelligible. So I do think that they're given the state of any bounded rational agent. Basically a finite being, given the cognitive architecture of any finite being, I think it's reasonable to suspect that there are both concepts it can access and concepts it can't. And the mere fact that it can't access them doesn't mean that the concepts aren't meaningful. And further, I would add, because I already said, I certainly think that there are concepts some people can't grasp in virtue of their cognitive capacities, and that I'm a candidate for someone that can't grasp certain concepts. Again, I really don't think that's the case in this particular case, that I'm not grasping the concept of like an external reason because of my own idiosyncrasies or deficiencies cognitively or whatever. I think it's because the concepts aren't meaningful. But there could be, concepts that no humans could grasp. I don't think, in other words, like Mysterianism is like logically impossible. I don't think it's true. I think humans can grasp what consciousness is. I'm not sure that they have yet. I think that we're maybe on the right path, but we're not there yet. So, I tend to favor views closer to qualia quietism, illusionism. So Keith Frankish, Dan Dennett, Pete Mandic, people that do that kind of work. So people that tend to fall more towards, a lot of people on that side would call themselves physicalists. I don't know that you need to be a physicalist to reject, the hard problem of consciousness, that sort of thing. So yeah, but there are people that have floated this idea that you can't grasp consciousness. And even if you could grasp consciousness, maybe there's some other candidate concept that you couldn't grasp. So I don't think that that's an issue. The type of meaningfulness I'm talking about has more to do with the characteristics of the concept in question itself, where the concept in question, you could say, lacks content. It doesn't do anything. So, and that would be true independent of the standpoint of any particular agent, including all humans. Irreducible normativity is just Hume's Isolde problem, isn't it? I don't think so. I don't think that it is. And I think that when people talk about the Isolde problem, there's that sort of logical issue that I referenced earlier, but sometimes I think people want to leverage it to say something more robust than that. If you cannot reduce norms into facts, and facts are the real thing, if a term is given, it is not meaningless. Well, so I'm not sure quite what you mean by that, but I certainly, like, someone can come up with a term and then like stipulate that it's meaningless. So I could make up a new word right now, yibbity flibbity, and I could say, yeah, yibbity flibbity doesn't mean anything. It'd be weird to say that term is meaningful. What does it mean? That it doesn't mean anything? But you also have already existing things like nonsense poems and, people that just, if someone is singing and then they go like skibbity, skibbity bop, 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 like does that locution mean something? I don't think that it is. Arguably, though, you might say that's not a term. But I do think people can come up with terms that are not meaningful. I don't know that merely because someone uses a term, it must be meaningful. Satisfactory is a normative word. You're reasoning. Yeah. So when I say satisfactory, I'm not appealing to stance-independent normativity in doing so. So if someone wants to say, okay, well, then you're stuck with some kind of relative thing, and someone might have different standards for what is satisfactory or not, I would just agree. So, and I don't think that's a problem. Isn't embeddedness in a web of beliefs sufficient for meaning? I don't think so. I think you could have a whole network of meaningless terms and concepts. So, you could have a web of beliefs where, you could have a web of nonsense terms that are all mutually reinforcing and they give the impression of meaningfulness, even when none of them are actually meaningful. So you say you've suggested the idea of meaningless term is embedded in a web. The web is a buffer, you said, but embeddedness is sufficient for meaning. So there are no embedded and meaningless words. So I wouldn't agree. So we would have to have a discussion about that. You don't have to go literally one by one reading these comments. I skip over a few, but I felt like it. So I can if I want to. Right. So, if someone tells me, so you say, if you don't need the concept, fine. I need it though. So it is superfluous to me. Oh, sorry. It isn't superfluous to me, even if it is superfluous to you. So if it's not superfluous for you, if it's doing some work, then I would just ask, what's that work? So it might be that it's not superfluous to you, that it is doing work. At the very least, I could say, unless you can explain that to me in a way where I go, oh, okay, now I get it. And now I understand. I'm not in a position to judge, so anybody could say that their concepts are useful for them or necessary or whatever, indispensable. But whether they're right or wrong is going to be a question to submit to, the public discussion. I'm not, it's merely because someone claims that it's a concept is necessary, useful, or important for them. I am not obligated to agree just because they claim that. I would want them to demonstrate that, to make an argument or something. So you asked this, when you ask what a word means, the only possible response I could give is a description of how this word relates to other words, right? I don't think so. I think people could do more than that. I don't think people don't just use words to refer to other words. So a lot of language is going to bottom out, I think, in gestures and ostension. So it's going to bottom out, and you could say pointing and grunting. So I think language arose largely. I don't know how much of it's a metaphor and how much it's meant literally, but language, I think, arose out of humans interacting with one another. It arose in social context in which people found a need to communicate goals. And, this was largely it's basically an elaborated game of charades. And so I see language as a type of behavior, and I see it as largely built on top of and a sort of elaborate means of communicating goals and intentions to others. That doesn't mean all language now must communicate goals and intentions to others. Obviously, people could talk to themselves, but that's how I think it emerged, and that's how I think that it functions. And I think that it's not going to just bottom out in other words. I don't think it's just words. It's not just a big verbal merry-go-round. I think language bottoms out in things other than words. I think it bottoms out in pointing to things in the world. So I might just not agree about the nature of language and its origins. Oh, right. All right. Okay. So we have Jonathan Becker here. Yo, stopping by to say, hey, we'll have to watch later. I'm moving through the concepts the concepts. I say concepts so much now. I just say I'm moving through the comments because I want to, get somewhere with this and not just. Well, it's nice to talk about the concepts. I said it again. Okay, let me pause. It's good to actually get to the comments, and there's been a lot, so that's been nice. But I want to just move ahead and see where I'm at and try to get caught up. So that's what I'm going to do. It's funny. I said concept so much that it's just super primed in my brain. So it's super salient. So I just keep saying concepts for any similar word like comments. It's just getting morphed into concepts. I got to slow down sometimes. I'm trying to be more chill when I'm in here. I think that very much failed. What was it, a week or two ago? I was pretty agitated. Okay. All right. That's an interesting concept. I said it again. Oh my God. Okay. This is an interesting comment. There's a sense in which, this is from Nora Belrose. There's a sense in which I just agree with divine command theorists that there would need to be a divine lawgiver who enforces ultimate justice in order for mortal facts to be meaningful. Yeah, I would say that I don't think that there would need to be like a god. What if the universe had rules? Almost like I read lit RPG, so this is like literary. It's fiction with role-playing game elements in it. So often the characters in the game will have like a user interface and have hit points and stuff. A lot of it is pretty cheesy. Some of it is pretty good. I like it anyway. I want, that's my lame entertainment. So judge me if you want. You know, in those games, there doesn't need to be an actual god or an arbiter of the game for the game itself to have rules. And so it could be, you know, if you do something evil, you lose karma. If you do something good, you gain karma. And then that changes what classes are available. It changes your alignment, or it changes your powers or your abilities. And so the universe itself can approve or disapprove of your actions. You could gain experience. You could gain, you know, if you try to cheat the system and make, you know, do an exploit, it could punish you and by giving you a really difficult quest that's mandatory or whatever. So even that, I know it's fictional, but it illustrates a way in which the universe can regulate your actions in a way where there's an external imposition on you, but note that it bottoms out in your own goals and interests, you know? So you say here, this lawgiver who enforces justice, right? So, you know, if there is a God and that God says, hey, if you break these rules, I'm going to do these mean things to you. You don't want me to do that. And if you do this good stuff over here, I'm going to give you a bunch of awards. You're giving people carrots and sticks. And that's fine with me, but that's not going to give you any type of, you know, not that you're suggesting otherwise, but it's not going to give you realism, because the only way I think that this is going to get off the ground is with carrots and sticks. In other words, behavioral incentives. And, you know, this is part of my concern with these stance independent moral facts. So someone says you must comply with them. Okay, never mind whether I must or not. Let's just suppose I don't. Now what? What happens? As far as I can tell, nothing at all. Oh, right. That's what I wanted to get to. The Bernard Williams quote. I keep mentioning it. Let me get fully caught up and then I'll get to that. So I have some sympathies with this remark. And I think it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, like the way that a God would become relevant to people's lives is with carrots and sticks, not just existing. Okay. Yeah, I agree with this. Or maybe just a non-divine emperor of the planet would work too. I see this one. What is that shark mug there, or the mouth mug thing? It looks interesting. That's funny. I don't know why I thought it was a shark. It's just a mouth. It's like a picture of a mug and it has weird looking teeth on it. It's pretty cool. Okay. Do you think it's meaningful to say that I desire to do P, but also hold the belief that I should not do P? Huh. I think it can be. Yeah. So what I might appeal to are like, so you could have sort of higher order and lower order desires. So I could say something like, I really desire to eat this cake, but I don't think that I should. And in that case, I would be appealing to a more fundamental desire. I don't know what else it might mean. So it doesn't, to me, if I were to make sense of this, I would make sense of it in a way where I understood desire architecture in a way consistent with anti-realism and not in a way consistent with realism. So yeah, I think I could account for that type of language in a way where I don't think it's incoherent, but also where it doesn't imply moral realism, or it doesn't have to be moral realism, but some type of normative realism. All right. There's another comment. I wonder if we can make the meaninglessness thesis more plausible. I like that you're taking over the name. So last week, Nora Belrose suggested that, I think it was you, right? That I should change the terminology and stop saying unintelligible and say meaningless. And then also, I think you suggested that I should drop both and go with trivial. So that's the stronger one. I don't want to do that. But I would consider the unintelligible meaninglessness shift. Anyway, so you're just running with meaninglessness thesis. If I'm recalling correctly, I get so tangled up with who said what and when they said. I don't remember what I say. So I've had people quote me and then I don't remember that I said the thing, and I'm like, who said that? And it's not always good. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, that person was clever, and then they're like, that was you. But then other times I've had people say, well, you said this, and I was like, oh, that's stupid. I don't know why I said that. So it's not always a good thing. Anyway. I wonder if we could make the meaninglessness thesis more plausible by tracing the historical development of contemporary moral realism. It seems like a recent phenomenon. I absolutely super duper want to do this. So I already sent out 1 or 2 emails about this. I want to send out some more, talking to people that have more knowledge and experience of the history of 20th century meta ethics, because that is where I think I could start building that case. So I don't really endorse evolutionary debunking arguments. That is a huge digression I absolutely won't get into now. And what I favor is, you could say, some other type of genealogical debunking argument. And what I want to get into is cultural debunking arguments, where there's a certain Nietzschean flair to them, where what I suspect is, so here, very roughly, what I suspect has gone on with the appeal of moral realism in analytic philosophy is roughly this. I think that monotheistic religions that depicted the world in these Manichaean terms of a sort of cosmic forces of light and darkness, good and evil. There's like dichotomous forces. So, you have Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Those religions, I think, had a huge influence on Western thought. And with a healthy dose of the metaphysical confusions, I would say, the metaphysical presuppositions of Western philosophy, that sort of got enmeshed. And I think it's more the Christianity aspects of it than the Western philosophy aspects, but I think they're probably both playing a role. Anyway, so if generation after generation is brought up to have this sort of almost intuitive sense, you're immediately saturated in the constant depiction of a world in which there is forces of good and evil. And this is, constantly reinforced in your myths, your legends, your stories, your holy books, your scriptures, what you're taught, how you're taught to think about things, the legal system, your artifacts, the cultural motifs. Look at Star Wars with the Force, and you have the light side and the dark side. This is I think a sort of recapitulation of the same Manichaean, or this like dichotomous good evil thing. So if you have that for thousands of years in a particular culture, and then you have the Enlightenment, you have the rise of secularism, and you start to chip away at the theological foundations of Christianity and of monotheistic religious belief, and of religious belief more generally, and even supernatural belief in its entirety. You could disbelieve in God and still think there's ghosts or astrology or whatever. But as modern science and secularism chipped away at those beliefs, what ended up happening is, I think, for many people, they lose belief in God, but because that God was basically it was like their whole sense of good and evil, cosmic meaning, and all that was embedded in these theological concepts. To abandon God is to throw out basically all of the bathwater with the baby, culturally speaking. And so you have this looming threat of nihilism. Life has no purpose or meaning. Everything sucks. Because if you throw out God, God was the source of that division of good and evil. And that is what gave people the sense there was, something there's ultimate value, there's true value, and it's not your value, it's out there independent of you. So when you throw out those theistic underpinnings, some people dive right into existentialism, embrace the nihilism, plow through and create their own meaning. But I think for a lot of people, you had more, then you had a whole, the linguistic turn and this sort of dip in realism. But there was this resurgence, starting in the 80s, really picking up steam in the 90s, and then really taking off in the past 20, 30 years with the work of Russ Schaefer Landau, Mike Humer, David Enoch, and quite a few other, Terence Cuneo, and quite a few other prominent moral realists have really, it's been taking off. And I suspect part of the reason for this is this residual cultural influence of monotheism and this Manichaean sense of cosmic good and evil. But then also I think this is bolstered and augmented by certain notions that have persisted in analytic philosophy about language, meaning, and metaphysics. Okay, so I think that understanding the history would be relevant to this, and I do think that would be important. So I said all that not having read this. Maybe it influenced my subconscious, but I've said these things before. In any case, secular philosophers want to have moral facts just like the theists, and so they invented this nonsense. I think that is basically what's going on here. Yeah, I think that secular philosophers, it feels like a world without this sense of value seems meaningless and empty. And I've sometimes floated the notion that I think some of the attraction to some people towards secular conceptions of moral realism are motivated by a type of crypto-theism or a type of residual desire to maintain the types of meaning and value that theism provided, and in its absence doesn't feel good. And I think that some degree of motivated reasoning may be influencing people. this is just a hypothesis. It could be totally wrong, and it certainly probably doesn't describe everybody. I say certainly, probably. I don't look. I'm not going to go around saying, hey, you're a realist because you're afraid of nihilism, or you're a realist because you don't want to live in a world without meaning. I'm perfectly willing to grant that people are realists because they think they've got good arguments for it, and they're convinced by those arguments. So that's totally fine. So this is what I'm offering is a highly speculative sketch of one possible motivating factor. And I do not want to or like the idea of psychologizing people and then implying that they're wrong because of that psychologization. But I do think the reasons why we come to hold the beliefs we have are relevant. So I think someone could do the same in my case. Someone could say that, I caught this bug of really liking these sort of contrarian views or really liking sparse ontologies. And so I'm motivated by a desire to I like the sort of just being anti, I want to get rid of things. I want to expunge things. And that I get my joy out of tearing down other people's philosophical views. And so I'm motivated by a desire to tear other people's views down. And I have huge biases in favor of, anti-realist types of accounts. That might even be true. That doesn't strike me as terribly implausible. I mean, for anybody that's heard me a whole lot, doesn't it seem like I like doing that kind of thing? Like, it's not that implausible that there's some degree of motivation. And so I don't think if we can offer even pretty plausible or even establish motivations as influencing factors, these are one factor among many. Even if a person is motivated to believe in God, does that mean they don't have good reasons to believe in God? No, I don't, I'm not a theist. I don't think there are great arguments for theism, but the mere fact that someone wants Christianity to be true doesn't invalidate the arguments that they give for it. I think that'd be ridiculous. And so, I think it's just like one point that should be put on the board when we're tallying up the case for and against a particular view is whether we can identify plausible motives. Same thing like, if you read a research paper, right, and it's really rigorous, high quality, all this stuff, and then you see, and let's say it's about a particular medication, and then you see that part of the grant was from a pharmaceutical company that's producing that medication. Does that mean all the results are just total bullshit and you should just throw it out? There's no way the findings could be true? Of course not. Would findings that are funded by someone that has an interest in the outcome be more likely to report positive results? Yeah, I think there's even research showing that people are biased. It's at least plausible to think that that bias would be present. And so take it into consideration if there's a conflict of interest, but it doesn't necessarily entail some sort of decisive problem. In other words, the fact that someone has a conflict of interest does not entail that they're acting maliciously. The fact that someone has motivations for believing something doesn't mean that they must be wrong about it. And this applies in this is a two-way street. But that doesn't mean if we can't point to genealogical considerations, motivations, why someone would believe something, even though it's not true, that isn't a factor in assessing whether they're like, I think it is evidence against the truth of the claim. If you could identify reasons why they would want to believe it, independent, like that don't track whether it's true. Oh, right. That's why you're largely parroting Richard Rorty right now for your information. Yeah, so I haven't read Rorty, so I don't know what Rorty says about this stuff. If I am, cool, then I guess Rorty is awesome. At least in this respect. I don't know enough about Rorty to know one way or another. All right. Okay, confirmation. Yeah, it was me who brought up unintelligible, meaningless. Just wanted to confirm. I don't want to mess things up here. Sorry, I'm reading stuff for anybody listening to this. Right, so now people are talking to one another. Cool. Okay, I think that gets me caught up. I also only have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to read that quote from On What Matters, and I think then I'll wrap it up. All right, and thanks so much for everybody that has stuck around today. Okay, so this is page 272 of On What Matters, Volume 2 from Derek Parfit. And here's what we got. When Williams argues that there are no such reasons, his main claim is that externalists cannot explain what it could mean to say that we have some external reason. I admit that when I say that we have some reason or that we should or ought to act in a certain way, what I mean cannot be helpfully explained in other terms. I could say that when some fact gives us a reason to act in some way, this fact counts in favor of this act, But this claim adds little, since counts in favor of means roughly gives a reason for. Williams suggests that the phrase has a reason does not have any such intelligible, irreducibly normative external sense. When he discusses statements about such external reasons, Williams calls these statements mysterious and obscure and suggests that they mean nothing. Several other writers make similar claims. So, note that last line, several other writers make similar claims. I don't know where. I haven't found these. So if you know where, please let me know where people have said these sorts of things. But notice the language here. And this is language that, as far as I know, I discovered after I started saying this. I had read excerpts from this, so it's possible I ran into this, and the language actually comes directly from Williams, in which case I'm happy to give Williams credit for the idea. In any case, what you see is that look at the beginning. When Williams argues that there are no such reasons, his main claim is that externalists cannot explain what it could mean to say that we have some external reason. And so this is consistent with much of what I say, which is like, look, one of my concerns is that proponents of these ideas can't explain what they mean. Now, do I take that to be decisive? No, I don't take it just because someone can't explain something that it's not meaningful. But I do take it to be evidence that it's not meaningful. Just be a Bayesian about this. If I said, what's a cat? And someone goes, this is a cat. And then I'm like, what is that? And first of all, the thing I'm pointing to is a cat. So cats exist. It's right here. And then they go on to describe the cat. Okay, well, that gives me a pretty good reason. I'm not going to have too much trouble understanding what a cat is. They can explain it. In this case, notice what Parfit goes on to say is Parfit does the whole thing about counts in favor, but then explicitly it just says, yeah, it basically just means the same thing. And so what you get is this verbal merry-go-round where A is B and B is C and C is A and A is B and B is C, where you're like, okay, what is an A? It's a B. What's a B? It's a C. What's a C? It's an A. What's an A? It's a B. And the people that are saying this readily acknowledge, I can't tell you. I can't do more than this. Now, if you were communicating concepts, you do not have to use just words. I really recommend people, I think people are going to make fun of me for recommending the same books so many times. I don't care. I'm going to keep recommending them. If you want to make fun of me for recommending the same 4 books, too bad. So those are the books I want to talk about. If you don't like it, tough. So right at the beginning of this book, The Language Game, by Morton Christensen and Nick Chater, you really should check out The Language Game. It's awesome. They have interviews on YouTube. Check them out. I'm going to keep recommending them. I'll probably get tired of doing so in like a month or two. Deal with it. So at the beginning of that, they talk about this particular voyage where people arrived in a boat in a place where they didn't know who the people on the island were that they encountered. They didn't speak the same language. And the other people that were from the island showed up. They were arriving in their own boats, right? And they're approaching the ship that arrived there, and they're holding weapons in their hands. And when they got close enough for the others to see them, and maybe I don't remember all the details, but roughly this is what happened. They're holding their weapons. They dropped all their weapons. So the people on the ship were like, it looks like they're communicating that they come in peace, that they're not intending to attack us. So sure, let's board and let's try to communicate, maybe trade. And that is what they meant. That is what they were trying to communicate. And they got along great. They traded. They did whatever it is they needed to do. And then they went about their ways. Now, they didn't speak the same language, but they were able to largely communicate through body language and gestures. If I'm arriving in a ship, there's a context there, right? I'm arriving in a ship. You might think, hey, these people have been traveling. Maybe they want some water. So if I show up and I go I'm saying I'm thirsty, like I need water, right? And then if I rub my belly, and then do like I'm holding a fork or something, you might think, or I go like this, like I was using a spoon, and then I rub my belly, and then and then I hold out my hands. You could understand I'm communicating. Hey, I am hungry. Do you have food that you could share with me? So you can communicate with gestures. You're basically doing charades. And so that's the central metaphor of The Language Game. And, part of the point that they're making there is that, language is just a sort of technology that developed on top of what ultimately is the ability to communicate in this way that's highly improvisational and context dependent. And that's what language does. That's what language is. It's a constant, ever evolving, constantly, it's in a perpetual state of flux. It's always being updated. It's always changing. It's always modifying itself over time. It's always adapting to the situation. And so words don't have these rigid and fixed meanings. They serve to facilitate the sort of local proximal agenda of the people that are communicating. Wittgenstein made similar remarks. I think they even start the book with a Wittgenstein quote. But just the point here is that communication can bottom out in something as simple as pointing at things, gesturing at things, doing things, showing things. It doesn't require simply appeal to other words. It's not just an endless loop of words. And if you do have complicated words, those words, you don't immediately acquire the most complicated, sophisticated. No one is like enters into the world with a concept of like quantum mechanics or set theory or something like that. It's something that you're going to learn. But how, I'm going to take a super empiricist approach to this. I think that we learn by acquiring percepts and building up a repertoire and making distinctions and forming categories, testing them, applying them in the world, learning more basic and simple concepts, and then building and building and building from there. But that bottom foundation is going to be observations. It's going to be interaction and engagement with the world around us. It's not just going to be words, words, words. It's not all words. So no, I don't think that all definitions are circular. I think that definitely that the meanings of words, insofar as they're embedded in networks of other words, you could have a word in this level, and then this word is only connect to other words up here, but then there's a thread to this concept that's a simpler concept, and that one's connected to a simpler concept, and that one's connected to a simpler concept. And then at the bottom of that foundation is stuff that bottoms out in experiential considerations, things you could point to in the world. And so what you could have are these spandrels. Like you get these rogue concept networks where the terms in that web refer to concepts that are not connected to the other concepts in a way that gets you back down the web to something more fundamental and basic. And so you have these concepts at these higher levels of abstraction that are sufficiently embedded in discourses, but the discourses themselves sort of don't touch ground anywhere. They never bottom out or connect to the rest of our discourse in a way that ends up being meaningful. And so there are these sort of free-floating discourses that I think don't bottom out in anything meaningful. They don't bottom out in prediction, observation, and getting things done. So that is a very, very rough sketch of what I think is going on here. And then lastly, now I wanted to finish a couple more things from this same passage. So again, this is page 272 in volume 2 of On What Matters. And after those remarks about what Williams says, this is what Parfit says. When I claim that Williams and I use different concepts of a reason, I am assuming that each of us at least knows what he himself means. But that might not be true. People sometimes fail to understand not only what other people mean, but even what they themselves mean. It makes a difference here whether the phrase has a reason for acting has only one ordinary sense or meaning, and if so, what that sense is. Note two things here. First, let me go over that first passage again. It's one short little paragraph. When I claim that Williams and I use different concepts of a reason, I am assuming that each of us at least knows what he himself means, but that might not be true. People sometimes fail to understand not only what other people mean, but even what they themselves mean. Now, Parfit here is acknowledging what appears to me to be explicitly the possibility that Parfit is subject to a conceptual confusion. Of course, Parfit doesn't think that, but Parfit is acknowledging it's possible that, look, if I use a term and you use a term, we typically presume that we know what we mean, and even if we don't know what the other person means, that we at least know what we mean. But Parfit is saying sometimes that's not true. It's at least possible that's not true. It's possible that we don't even know what we ourselves mean. And so one thing I really want to emphasize here is that Parfit himself is explicitly acknowledging that it's possible that proponents of these sorts of concepts don't even know what they themselves mean. And that is in fact my hypothesis. So one thing I want to stress here, because I've had people say, no one thinks this way, this is a ridiculous proposal. Parfit seems to suggest that this is at least on the table as a possibility. And then a prominent philosopher has explicitly said, yeah, this is what I think is going on here. And this is someone that, is apparently engaging in discussions with Parfit. This is not an ignorant, unfamiliar person. This is a person that's involved in the field. And they are saying this. Is Williams just a moron who's never read about or thought about any of this stuff? That's super duper implausible. And so something at least interesting is going on here. If people like Williams, it's not like Williams doesn't know about this, Williams knows about this, and this reached what appears to be the same conclusion as I do. And then you have this latter remark. It makes a difference here whether the phrase has a reason has only one ordinary sense or meaning, and if so, what that sense is. So now we're making these claims that shade into possibly empirical concerns about what other people mean. Parfit goes on to say a few more things, but I think I have to wrap up there. So maybe I'll get back to that next week. I see a few more comments. Unfortunately, I am not going to, get to the rest of these, but I do appreciate the comments, and thanks so much for all the comments. And I'm glad I was able to get through so many of them today. And okay, so I am going to wrap it up there. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. And next week I have off. I'll be posting an older appearance that I did on another channel, and then I'll be back hopefully the week after that. All right, thanks so much, everybody. I will see you all later. Take care.